Tucker Carlson did an interview with Adam Carolla, and I want to walk through some of the moments from this. It was a podcast interview. It's just fascinating when I come across podcast moments from Tucker Carlson when he does these interviews, because his dishonesty is less effectively delivered whenever he's in this setting. When he doesn't have the script and the proper setting, he's not as effective at delivering his dishonesty. So it kind of makes it just fascinating to analyze, I guess, because of his ability to effectively manipulate the minds of so many people, clearly with him being the largest cable news host and the disastrous rhetoric he puts out there. But the last two clips we're going to get to are so bizarre. Number one, he's talking about Charles Manson, the serial killer's sex life. How'd we get there? And number two, he blurts out somewhat randomly, if he's accused of a crime, he was framed. So we'll get to those. But first, he's talking about the left and those in Washington who hate him. And it gets him to the subject of NATO. And he does the little bit he does all the time about Trump and NATO and his stance on not understanding the point of NATO. And I'll respond to that after we take a look at this.
And they know that I know. And so that's why they hate me. I'm just being honest. I mean, I honestly think that. I've never been yelled at by anybody's housekeeper or any cab driver. The only people I've ever been yelled at are from that world. And it's a world that I'm from. So it's like, yeah, okay, honey, I know who you are.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, it's totally true. Ask them. Some of my producers are in the room and they're nodding because they travel with me. It's always that. It's always 100% that. So I'm like a traitor or something, and I'm from Washington. I spent my whole life in Washington, and like they're all super mad at me because I watched them go insane. I watched Trump, whatever you think of Trump, called bullshit on a bunch of their different longstanding scams, particularly in foreign policy. When Trump said, "What's the point of NATO?" and they called him a racist for asking, I was like, "Oh, wait a second. You hate him because he's calling bullshit on your schemes, and you don't have a good answer. You can't tell me what the point of NATO is. What is the point of NATO? I'll listen patiently as you explain. Oh, well, shut up, racist. Okay, that's your answer. So
You just sounded like someone doing an impersonation of you.
No,
your last 5 seconds.
Okay, but it's just heartfelt. I mean, like I really feel that way, and I was there, and I saw it. I know. I worked for Bill Kristol for 6 years. I know how this works. So I'm not guessing, and they really hate that.
I also have
So that's a bit he's done multiple times now. Oh, Trump got in there and asked, "What's the point of NATO?" And no one had a response. They just said he was racist. I don't even know what he's referencing. I tried to find a story about that, but I don't even know what the context of that would be. Maybe if he was saying something specific within the conversation about NATO that got... or maybe Tucker's making it up. Send me something if you have an example of that happening. But the reason why NATO should not be abolished or the United States shouldn't pull out of it, there's an actual argument that Tucker doesn't want to engage with. So instead, it's about people calling Trump racist. The reason is actually being highlighted with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Would Russia have at all, but at least have been anywhere as likely to invade Ukraine if Ukraine was a part of NATO? Absolutely not. They would have been much less likely to invade Ukraine if Ukraine was a part of NATO, because that would have been declaring war against or with all of NATO, the United States included. And so when you have a military alliance with countries that are smaller and less powerful militarily than the United States, but they're protected by the United States, then they are going to be in a better situation where the United States' general interests across the board are actually being represented by the stability and by the unity that creates with us and other countries, and our ambition for Russia not to be able to do what they'd like to do in invading these countries and all that. So the United States benefits, and also these smaller countries are protected in a way they would never could be by themselves, because the most powerful military is behind them if Russia were to invade. So that's the point. You can disagree with it, but that's the point of NATO. Pretending like the only argument against Tucker Carlson's anti-NATO stance is you're a racist is so disingenuous. And I say again, we're watching the point of NATO right now because Ukraine is being invaded, and we know Russia would be much less likely to invade a country such as Poland because of their membership in NATO. Next moment here, more on him getting called a racist.
Yeah, they also think that you're supposed to cower in fear when they wag their finger at you, and especially the things like the race card. For
you're
them,
a racist.
that always works for them,
Yeah,
and that
no.
can shut every detractor up.
If
And-
I were a racist, it would work on me, but I'm actually not. And so I'm not guilty about it at all.
yes,
And, if they ever attack me on things that I do have some bad attitudes about things. Mostly I admit them. But if they ever attacked me on something I was guilty of, they would shut me up.
right.
If I was like cheating on my taxes and they're like, you cheat on your taxes, I'd be like, oh, I don't cheat on my taxes. But calling me a racist, like I'm actually not a racist, and I'm not, my views are, I'm not embarrassed of my views at all. I don't think I should be.
Yeah. So that's always the beneficial way to frame it for someone like Tucker Carlson. Am I a racist? No, in my heart, I'm not. I know I'm not. So they must be wrong. So they must be unhinged because they're saying I'm a racist. Like it's an inherent characteristic. And some people who are even levying that criticism, do they have a misunderstanding about this conversation? Sure. But Tucker Carlson doesn't want to engage with the actual criticism of his ideology, the rhetoric he puts out there being racist. He wants to make it about, was I born racist? Will I always be? No, I'm not. I know myself. It's not, that's irrelevant. I don't care where your heart's at. I care the actions you're taking, the way that you communicate things to your viewers, the rhetoric you put out there. And it's just clear night after night because Tucker Carlson benefits from this, from the standpoint of viewership. He divides people in many different ways, and one of them is along racial lines. And so whether or not as a human in your personal life, you see yourself as racist, which is irrelevant. The criticism, the important part of the criticism is that you promote things on your show that promote racism and racist ideologies. And he doesn't want to engage with that because that would be actually engaging with the merits of the argument. And as we saw at the last clip as well, he doesn't like doing that. It all has to be this completely oversimplified and strawmanned argument that he pretends is coming from the left of, they just think I'm a racist. I was born a racist. I'm inherently a racist, and I know myself not to be. It's dumb. Next clip here, we start getting into the extra weird stuff. This is him getting on the subject of Charles Manson's sex life, but it starts out with a conversation about masks. Take a look.
And it's insane. The difference is if your rural community of 100 people got the science wrong, it would be fine because they're not making policy decisions.
That's right.
So we have the sort of I believe it's a lack of religion in its
Of course it is.
in its place, superstition, and if you just think we should all look back on this era and think about this phrase, mask up in between bites. The notion that was even uttered from a mouth, much less a mouth of authority, into a microphone or into the galley, into the alleyway of an airplane at the beginning. The idea that somebody just said, mask up in between bites, and we listened it's insane. The Manson family is not as insane as the person that came up with mask up in between bites.
And they had more sex than your average and probably healthier sex lives than your average.
The Mansons, for sure. Yes.
Leader of our society now. They're all weird, androgynous, celibate, creepy, isolated people who are encouraging children to be androgynous and celibate and isolated. It's like, whoa, I'm opting out, dude. This is too dark for me.
But it's...
So setting aside the Manson family's sex life, the thing about the masks, there were totally things done that weren't logical, yeah. But I will 100% defend the fact that in a situation where there were so many unknowns, so many people dying, we now have more than 1 million people dead in this country from COVID. There were going to be a lot of people saying, let's just try to overdo it as far as safe. If we can put the mask on in between, it might not make any sense. We don't know for sure. We're still trying to study some of this. Let's just be extra safe. That to me is not irrational. That's just trying to make sure all the steps are taken, and if some extra steps that weren't necessary are taken, okay, it's not the worst thing in the world. What is the worst thing in the world is people dying because we don't take enough precautions. And so this reflection upon COVID, and we look at the irrational things and people go, oh! We have to remember we were in a crisis. We didn't know what was going on. There was so much confusion. So yeah, erring on the side of caution is not irrational. It's definitely not crazier than the Manson family, I gotta say. And then final clip, just no introduction needed. Take a look.
Go to, places where they congregate in general. I'm not welcome there. And that's fine with me. I'm also middle-aged, I'm out. I don't care what they think. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I hope it's evident. And I feel like they don't have a leash on me. And I do think at some point they'll probably figure out a way to get me. And if I ever get caught with, a quarter pound of heroin in my truck or kiddie porn on my computer, you'll know that they've gotten me. If they accuse me of some crime, I'm just telling you now, it's not real, but whatever. But until then, I just don't care, because I don't think the people who call you a Nazi when you're arguing against the Nazi position, as I always have and always will, I don't think they're arguing in good faith. I don't think it means anything. It's dogs barking. It's just not relevant to me at all.
So, yeah. Okay. Well, that's that. If he's ever found with kiddie porn or heroin, he was framed. All right. Well, it has been said. It has been put out there. Now, if it happens, he should be let off, I guess. So strange. But there it is, Tucker Carlson and Adam Carolla.